Living Time by Maurice Nicoll, Chapter 6, Aeon. The Hermetic writer who advises the practice of thinking that we are living at all points of the life remarks that in this way a man begins to be changed into eternal substance. What is behind this statement? Why is the notion of eternity, whatever that means, connected with thinking this all of the life? We need to get rid of some false meanings that we give to the words eternal and eternity. The psychological idea connected with eternal life cannot be limited to the view that man is changed into another state at death merely by the act of dying. It would be far more correct to say that it refers, first of all, to some change that man is capable of undergoing now, in this life, and one that is connected with the attainment of unity. The modern term psychology means literally the science of the soul. But in former times there actually existed a science of the soul based upon the idea that man is in an imperfect state but capable of reaching a further state. Man can perfect himself, to use the psychological language of the New Testament. He can reach another state of himself, not by ordinary education, however efficient, but by a special kind of education, one not given by life, and not to be found in the ordinary paths of life. This second education was the original task of philosophy in its ancient and practical meaning. It had reference to the unfinished, uncompleted state of everyone in life, wherein we find ourselves in disharmony, one-sided and full of contradictions. Quote, "Man is no more a unity. The inward unity or harmony of his existence is disintegrated into a diversity of autonomous functions. No totality act is possible. The will is separate from knowledge, the feeling from intellect. Empirical psychology has to do with the disintegrated man, never with the integral." End quote. And that's from Emil Brunner, The Word and the World, 1931. This modern writer observes that the reintegration of man into a unity requires ideas and efforts that lie outside the field which psychology ordinarily concerns itself with. I would express this by saying that the unity of man is impossible on the level of consciousness which he uses. Our natural state is, internally, one of confusion, even insanity. We do not notice this distinctly. Now, while this internal condition of man, at the ordinary level of consciousness, has been clearly realized from earliest times, what particularly characterizes the early standpoint of practical philosophy was the view that there was a perfectly definite further state of a seed or a chrysalis. Man could not merely become better, a better social being or a person more adapted to life, but he could become something quite different. We find this central idea running through all esoteric teaching, whether in the New Testament or elsewhere. Man can perfect himself, become complete, become a whole being, and as we shall see later, eternal had this significance. To lay hold of eternal life referred to some possibility in this life, to some change that a man can undergo here, or at least begin to put himself in the way of. From this deeper standpoint, no true psychology of man can exist without this goal being recognized as the aim, and all the various psychological findings about man, however contradictory, can only gain their proper relation and proportion when drawn together under this supreme head. The end of man is the attainment of this further state of himself. His real explanation lies in this fact. He is only to be understood through this end. All the different parts of him, like the separate parts of a machine, are not understandable or relatable, unless the final aim and meaning of the whole is grasped. Otherwise, one investigator takes hold of one part, another part, and in each case gives the significance of the whole to the part, so that only contradiction and, what is worse, a malinterpretation of man result. This powerful idea about man's possible goal, concealed in his nature, dominated early religious and philosophical thought. A real, attainable goal was meant. The righteous man of the New Testament is not simply a kind, good man any more than is Plato's just man. Such terms, which are synonymous, the original word being the same in each case, refer to one who has attained unity, to one who actually possesses what other people imagine they already possess, to one who dwells in another relation to what I call psychological space. On another level, to a person who is eternally not like us and not where we are. They refer to one who has generated himself, raised his entire nature and discovered his real existence, and in a unique sense become an individual, so much so that we, constantly doing and saying and feeling entirely useless and meaningless things, probably seem mad to him. So definite a state was meant that it was called a new birth from above. Whatever this means, we can at least say that this new birth denotes another kind of man, an attainment which remains an impossibility unless we come in contact with ideas above those that belong to our ordinary education. For how can a man become anything greater unless he has not only the firm belief in something greater, but ideas that come from something greater? In the Greek, the word that we know in translation as eternal is aeos. Literally, the expression in the New Testament translated as eternal life is aeonian life. The Greek word aeon is translated usually by eternity. Many writers have in vain pointed out that these translations do not render the original meaning of the words. They are words that cannot be easily translated because they refer to conceptions that we no longer understand. Such difficulties indeed have been encountered in translating aeon and aeonos in the New Testament that we sometimes find them rendered by such different words as world, age, never, forever, everlasting, etc. i.e., the significance given suggests either a thing, a visible form of existence, such as world, or endless passing time, as in the translation forever and ever. We already know that behind the changing world in time, behind the life of becoming, older thought put an unchanging world, an invisible reality beyond the process of time. It is with this higher order of reality behind time that we must connect the word aeon, eternity. Aeon does not refer to the three-dimensional world in passing time. It refers to an order of existence belonging to what we are calling higher space. Aeon is not time, nor is it time itself, but some overshadowing totality that comprehends all in itself. In the New Testament, God is said to have created the aeons, translated ages. He is called King of the aeons. If we think of this word as meaning ages, it has a time significance, only a strange one, one that begins to turn our minds towards more than a three-dimensional world. The ages were created. Let us first look at one interpretation of aeon in a time sense. We can understand that to dwellers in a plain world like a sheet of paper, anything belonging to our world passing through their world will take a certain time to do so. A pencil will take a certain time, and this time will be determined by the whole form of the pencil itself, which will of course be invisible and unknown to the paper beings, but known to us as higher dimensional beings. We might approximately think of the pencil itself existing in what is higher space for them, as the aeon to them, of that cross-sectional and defective form which manifests itself in their two-dimensional world. This illustration gives us a hint of one possible meaning of aeon, i.e., that which determines the form and extent of any existence in time, or the higher dimensional reality behind its expression in a world of more limited dimensions. The illustration is only approximate and ultimately inadequate, but it suggests a way of thinking how every object, visible in momentary passing time, has its own higher aeonian reality. According to many ancient passages, it is this aeonian reality that is first created in the scale of creation, e.g., God created the aeons, and any creature in time and space derives its origin from its aeon, but falls under the limiting conditions of time. It then undergoes a cycle of changes that constitutes its growth and decay, and following only what its senses depict, it derives from this sensory surrounding another kind of life, one in passing time, which seems confined to each moment only. In this successively single-momented life into which it falls, there is no sense of the life as aeon. It feels its existence only in a time sense. Now every creature's life, in a physical sense, has a certain length of appearance in time. I will quote from an article by De Quincey about the meaning of aeon. De Quincey is writing about the reference to eternal aeonian punishment in the New Testament, insisting upon the, quote, false interpretation given to the Greek word aeon, and given necessarily therefore to the adjective aeonius as its immediate derivative, end quote. Aeonian does not mean eternal, that is, in our ordinary usage of the term. What is an aeon, he asks. Quote, in the use and exaltation in the Apocalypse, it is evidently this, viz., the duration or cycle of existence which belongs to any object, not individually for itself, but universally in right of its genus. Kant, for instance, in a little paper which I once translated, proposed and debated the questions to the age of our planet, the Earth. What did he mean? Was he to be understood as asking whether the Earth were 500,000, 2 millions, or 3 millions of years old? Not at all. What he wished to know was simply the exact stage in the whole course of her development which the Earth at present occupies. Is she still in her infancy, for example, or in the stage corresponding to middle age, or in the stage approaching the superannuation? The idea of Kant presupposed a certain average duration as belonging to a planet of our particular system. Man again has a certain aeonian life, possibly ranging somewhere about the period of 70 years assigned in the Psalms. This period would represent the aeon of the individual Tellurian inhabitant of the Earth, but the aeon of the Tellurian race would probably amount to many millions of our earthly years. End quote. He goes on to say that nothing throughout universal nature can for a moment be conceived to have an accidental life period. Whether bird or tree or plant or man, each has its own aeon, the periods of its life cycle. He observes that the most faultless person must be satisfied, on reflection, that every life and mode of being must have hidden within itself the secret why of its duration, i.e. it is impossible to believe that any duration of anything is determined capriciously. Quote, the period or duration of every object would be essentially a variable quantity were it not mysteriously commensurate with that object. Everything in this world, possibly without a solitary exception, has its own separate aeon. End quote. From an article in the Wider Hope in 1890. De Quincey's article was written in 1852. Compare with this one of the propositions of Proclus. Quote, every intramundane soul has its proper life periods and cyclic reinstatements. End quote. De Quincey brings out only one significance of aeon. There is something that determines the length of life and the stages of growth and decay of everything in the visible world, and this is its aeon. A thing cannot be at any stage it wishes or extend its life indefinitely. The cycle of any life is determined by aeon. The illustration of the pencil passing through the two-dimensional worlds assists us to understand what is meant. Any cross-section of the pencil manifest to the paper beings is not an independent thing, although to them it will appear to be so. It is a partial manifestation of a higher dimensional form on one stage of that form, and its location in any point of time is not haphazard. As regards the life of the earth being something definite, there are many references in the apocryphal literature of the Old Testament, which at one time was valued many more highly than the canonical. which refers to stages of its life. In the Ezra Apocalypse, quote, "For the world age, saculum, aeon, in the time sense, is divided into 12 parts. 9 parts are past already, etc. Therefore lay aside thy burdensome cares, and hasten to remove from these times." End quote. Also, quote, "I disposed the world which I created by definite periods of time." End quote. The secret tradition of measured periods of time in which only certain things can happen is based on the idea that the aeon, or totality of the life of the earth in manifesting itself serially in time, follows certain stages, as does the life of man. Quote, "I showed to him the secrets of the times and declared to him the end of the seasons." End quote. The same view is met with in the ancient idea of successive ages of the earth, the golden, silver, bronze and iron ages. The same idea can be made to apply to civilizations. However civilizations start, they appear to pass through definite stages, like other organisms, and just as there are people who attain maturity early or late, so does it perhaps happen with civilizations. In any case, the fact that there are similar stages in the life of civilizations cannot be overlooked. Paracelsus applied this idea to disease. A disease runs a certain course and passes through certain stages. He called every disease an organism, a man, an entity, that is related to the body as a parasite to a plant, and which causes it to run a certain course and pass through certain stages. This is not the same explanation of disease as that given by the germ theory. Aristotle defined aeon of the universe in these words: "That which constitutes the enclosing limit of the whole universe, and embraces the infinite period and the infinity of all things in aeon." End quote. In a fragment attributed to Plato, the definition runs: "Aeon carries all. Long time knows how to change name, shape, disposition, and fortune." End quote. i.e., time means for us continual change, from one thing to another, from one state to another, but aeon is not time, or time itself, for it carries all simultaneously realized as together. Paul speaks of the aeon of this cosmos, i.e., presumably that which lies behind the visible cosmos moving in time. In the Hermetic literature, we find the statement that aeon is the soul of the cosmos. I must remind the reader of the definitions already given of God as beginning and end, and as all possibilities. With God all things are possible. Let us now set aside the consideration of aeon in its time sense. I regard the definition of beginning and end as referring to time itself. Everything is extended in time, in the fourth dimension of the world, and the other definition as referring to aeon itself. Aeon contains all things, all possibilities, the infinite aspect of everything. It is already evident enough that time and moment limits us to one thing at a time. So far as we experience time, which is one thing, then another, then a third, it certainly does not contain all possibilities. It is necessary to perceive that time, taken only as one dimension above space, is a line. Seen thus, our lives are lines. But if we imagine there are further dimensions, then they are lines through a higher dimensional world. For we must now begin to approach the idea of a higher space or further dimensions beyond time itself. What we know as time is merely one track through this higher space, and different in every person, i.e., no individual's timeline or track is the same as another individual's. Everyone meets his own obstacles, his own experiences, everyone follows or even forms his own time track, sometimes close beside another person's, sometimes widely divergent. This track in higher space is the life. It may be comparable to a zigzag line drawn through known space like a lightning flash. Actually, however, we are conceiving it as drawn through higher space. Now we have to imagine that this higher space contains everything, all possibilities, all possible events, all possible experiences, the sum total of reality known and unknown. It contains the infinite expression of all things. Consider one thought, one act of your own. Imagine this thought or act developed into the fullest ramification, like a tree, into every possible result and every conceivable form. This full development would be the infinite expression, the infinite form of this thought or act. But of course it cannot exist in time, for in time we only know one form, one expression, one result. Now imagine the world realised in all its possibilities. With this thought we will approach the conception of aeon. It takes us entirely away from any relation to time. The equivalent to the Greek word aeon is in Hebrew olam. Olam has not a physical significance, although it is often translated merely as world. But much more than the physical universe is meant by the term. We have already met this word in the passage from Ecclesiastes, where it is said that man goes to his long home at death. He goes to the house of his olam, aeon. If we try to grasp that the world in higher dimensions gives origin to the curtailed world in fewer dimensions, we can see that nothing can be added to the lower world that is not already in the higher world. The paper beings can add nothing to the pencil itself. In this light we can comprehend some of the meaning of the following passages in which the term olam is used. Quote, "For the Holy One hath weighed the world, and with measure hath he measured the times, and by numbers he hath numbered the seasons, neither will he rest nor stir until the number be fulfilled." End quote, from Esdras. Here world is olam. Quote, "I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be done for ever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken away from it." End quote, Ecclesiastes. Forever in this passage is, literally, olamic. God creates on the olamic or aeonian plane, i.e. behind aeon is God, and behind phenomenal reality is aeon. Quote, "God makes the aeon makes the cosmos makes time, and time makes coming to be. The essence of God is the good, the essence of the aeon is sameness, the essence of the cosmos is order, the essence of time is chance, and the essence of coming to be is life. The workings of God are mind and soul, the workings of the aeon are immortality and duration, the workings of the cosmos are reinstatement in identity and reinstatement by substitution, the workings of time are increase and decrease, and the workings of coming to be are quality and quantity. The aeon then is in God, the cosmos is in the aeon, time is in the cosmos, and coming to be takes place in time." End quote, from Walter Scott's translation of the Hermetica. This is causation in terms of rank or scale, or as it was called, order of excellence. Everything is contained in something greater, and what is greater is soul, i.e. what gives origin and meaning to what is lesser. This something greater does not act from the horizontal line of past, present, future, but meets us vertically. Where this vertical and horizontal line meet, in the point of now, stands man, and into this now of man, if it be realised, enter causes and effects from the line of time, from past and future, and influences from the vertical direction, from what ranks above the order of time. Seen in this way, we need not only be products of the past. The cause of our existence does not only lie in the generations of the past. Along the horizontal timeline are parents, grandparents, etc., one source of causes. But along the vertical line is cause coming from another direction, from aeon, and entering every moment into the present. Quote, "God then is the source of all things, the aeon is the power of God, and the work of the aeon is the cosmos, which never came into being, but is ever coming into being, by the action of the aeon, and that which holds the universe together is the aeon." End quote, from the Hermetica. Let us lay two classes of being, the seen and the unseen eternal in their relations, the seen never the same, but ever changing, wrote Phaedo in 77. We know those changing relations that belong to the changing order of time. In ourselves we can know the kaleidoscope of changing eyes. We know nothing of another form of relations, another existence and arrangement, which Plato here calls eternal, aeonian, quite different, for example, from the linked chain of apparent causes and effects in the phenomenal world. Cause and effect in time is one order of things, but only one order. The aeonian order demands a form of thinking that is opposed to the contemplation of the world by the senses, acknowledging nothing higher than the connected chain of things in the world of appearances, wrote Nanda. Now understanding is certainly more than sense. Quote, all the primal forces from which come the things seen lie entirely out of the field of sense, either as perceived or conceived under any of the forms of sense. End quote, Taylor Lewis. Plato means that the order and relations that are aeonian by their nature do not belong to time and sense, but are governed by principles which are fixed, unchangeable and necessary, not in the sense that they give a dead, immovable order of existence, but one of infinite harmony. All that belongs to time is a weak reflection of this perfect order of things. All belonging to time Plato calls a moving image of eternity. This moving image is that in which we live. In his allegory of creation, referring to the order of scale in the universe, Plato says that God thought to make a moving image of the fixed eternity, aeon, and as he arranged the heavens, eternity itself always remaining in unity, i.e. without succession, he made an image of eternity to proceed by number, i.e. by succession, the time which we call time. End quote. The reader will understand that all references to eternity as being fixed or unchangeable do not mean a static or frozen condition of things. On the contrary, they mean a perfect expression of all things, a state in which all possibilities, interblending and interpenetrating, are in harmonious accord, a state of infinite richness and diversity and fullness, obeying unchanging principles which bring every part into relationship with the whole. If man could reach a state of harmony, he would have been corresponding to this eternal world. Aeon, as a thought of God realized to its full, is developed in every direction, and time is a moving image, a trace of aeon, limited to our imperfect understanding, one expression of this full form. If we think of it in the language of dimensions, it means that time as we know it suffers from insufficiency. It has not the dimensional capacity to remain aeon, just as the paper world cannot contain a pencil. Let us note in passing that this inability of time to embrace aeon was held to be the cause of a circular movement, i.e. time is curved and keeps coming back on itself. To this we will return when speaking of recurrence. The aeonian order is full form, unknown to us in time. Limited form is time, for it is like a single note of a composition in which we do not hear the remainder, but hear only another note, in succession in time, derived perhaps from another composition. The Word of God, Logos, expressed in aeon is the full form, the full proportion, and all possible ratios, the full meaning and relations of things, having infinite diversity within its form. For we must not think of form, idea, as fixed, as we think of three-dimensional form, but rather as musical form, ever blending and transforming itself with its own proportions, combining variation within variation, without departing from its essential being, from what it is, and so remaining ever the same, or ever in one. And time, by contrast, is a fragment, a succession of bits, a patchwork. What comes next in time, for our experience, is not necessarily variation within form, for what comes next in time may be quite unrelatable to what preceded it. So continuity, in time is largely mere change from one thing to another. Our consciousness is incapable of remaining stable enough, owing to its lack of unity, to apprehend form, i.e. the infinite working out of one thing, the expansion of one motive into all possible transformations. In this sense I understand how time is an imitation of eternity, and how logos in aeon, as the infinite meaning of everything, cannot enter the natural level of consciousness. Even the greatest art can only make copies of the invisible centre of full meaning round which we are set. And we can understand how transformation of meaning, the seeing of new meanings within those meanings we already know, is not a process of logical thinking. For logical thinking deals rather with cross-sections of meaning, and is capable of bringing into juxtaposition things that are entirely unrelated in their true meaning, and quite incommensurable, but which look as if related, as a two-dimensional picture, drawn without any sense of depth or perspective, brings things into apparent relationship which are really far apart and unrelated. In this world of meaning within meaning, everyone is a point of reception and stands in relationship to infinite meaning, according to what meanings he has opened in himself. And in thinking of the universe as meaning within meaning, as something ultimately experienced in the soul, we must not blame the senses for giving us a wrong picture of things, or for making us see as outside us that which is within us. It is not the senses that are at fault, but our use of them. It is what is behind the senses, the perceiving mind, the understanding, that is at fault, for the senses cleansed see all as infinite and holy. Let us reflect for a moment on what are our ordinary natural notions of eternity. The terms eternal and eternity are bound up with our time psychology. Since we understand naturally everything in terms of our time and space, we cannot help imagining that eternity means eternity of time, a vast quantity of time, time going on and on in a straight line beyond calculation for ever and ever. And we probably think that eternal life means only something following on death, an infinite perpetuation of one in endless time. We bring the same kind of thinking, the same level of mind to bear upon the notions of eternity, as we do upon the things of space and time. In older thought, time and eternity were thought of as being incommensurable, inalienably dissevered. Plato speaks of the incommensurability of dimensions. They belong to totally different levels in that scale of reality that is truly universe, actually to different dimensions. All that has to do with eternity, eternal life, the soul or world in eternity, was put in contrast to everything belonging to time, temporal life, the flowing world as we know it, and our customary thoughts and emotional life in it, when untouched by the sense of intenser meaning. Eternity was connected with the world of being, time with the world of becoming, where nothing ever really is. In time, nothing ever is, but all things are becoming. Written in Theaetetus 152. We cannot hold on to any thing or person in time, because what it or he or she really is not there in time. All things are changing in time, some slowly, as the contour of mountains, some more quickly, as our bodies, some very quickly, as a house on fire. Time is change, on all sorts of different scales, and the phenomenal world is made up of this continual changing, at different rates, of everything, like an enormous clock full of wheels. Outside there is this stream of becoming, and within a stream of ever-changing thoughts and feelings, a succession of different eyes, of fragmentary bits of ourselves, an inner world of becoming in which nothing is, in which we possess nothing, and do not possess ourselves. We think of all this changing in time as progress, and not only do we have this extraordinary and absurd illusion, but we imagine that the stability that we all secretly crave can be sought for in all this machinery of change, in the turning wheels of this enormous clock. But we know that what is stable was always put beyond time. In man, it was said, there is something behind his time psychology, some definite possibility of being called eternity or eternal life. Ecclesiastes says that while all things are governed by time in the visible world, and man is under the dominion of time, he hath set eternity in the heart of man, chapter 3, verse 11. Here the word is olam, merely rendered as world in our usual versions, but signifying the macrocosmos, i.e., the apprehension of higher space is a possibility in man. It is only natural to the thought of that period that Ecclesiastes, after speaking of that order of reality belonging to passing time, should refer to another order outside time. He says that the heart of man can comprehend higher reality up to a point. The real distinction, therefore, between time and eternity is qualitative, and so must lie in the realm of psychological experience. Considered abstractly, no quantity of time can produce eternity, just as no matter how far we extend a line, we cannot produce a square or a cube. Considered psychologically, no quantity of a temporal experience can constitute a moment of eternal experience. And now a quote from Spinoza. Eternity cannot be defined by time or have any relation to it. End quote. We must clearly get rid of all associative connections with time before we can begin to understand what is meant by eternity, especially when we cancel the expression forever and ever. When glory is given to God forever and ever, aeonian existence is meant, the imagination being lifted to another order of reality above time, unto the aeon or unto the aeon of aeons. God is pre-aeonian in order of dignity, scale, an idea that we meet with long before the New Testament was written. We have also seen the order God, aeon, time in the Hermetic quotation, but because we have, particularly nowadays, no sense of scale, the language referring to eternity and the language referring to time are continually mixed together. Psychologically, then, eternity was connected with a possible state of man, a full state of being. Cosmologically, it referred to a perfect form of the world behind the perceptions of man. Let us turn to some thoughts and definitions. Alsoever where the was is one thing, and the shall be is another, is begotten but never is. It marches with time by which it is measured in becoming to be. In contrast to this flux, all that is eternal is whole at once. From Proclus. The distinction is clearly qualitative. Karl Barth observes, "If I have a system, it consists in this, that to the best of my ability I always keep in mind what Kierkegaard has called the infinite qualitative distinction between time and eternity, alike in its negative and positive meaning." End quote. He remarks that man loses himself in himself by confusing time and eternity, and therefore eternity with time, i.e., he attempts what cannot be attempted owing to this confusion of thought. Hansen points out that the lack of perception, due to the lack of recognition of scale in the universe, of the difference between time and eternity, gives man a sense of being able to achieve that is entirely false. He quotes the almost forgotten lines, "Doing is a deadly thing, doing ends in death," etc. Today, for example, we have the idea that we can conquer nature. Psychologically, this wholeness or completeness which is connected with the word eternity is compared to a state in which a man abides in time. It was said at the beginning of this chapter that the idea of unity and the meaning of eternity are connected. The expressions one, single, unity, wholeness are all related in this sense. And in contrast to this idea of one, all that belongs to time was said to follow number, i.e., it did not abide in one, but ran away into time, into succession, into 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The idea of wholeness and its meaning in its relationship to eternity is given in the beautiful description by Boethus. I give it here in full because it is so often marred by being quoted in part. Boethius, a Roman senator of the 5th century, was in prison, faced with death. It is said when he wrote his Consolations of Philosophy, in which the following passage occurs, quote, that God is eternal is agreed by all who possess reason. What then is eternity? Eternity is the complete and simultaneous possession of endless life in a single whole. The meaning of this will be clearer if we compare the eternal with the temporal. Everything that lives in time moves onward through the present from the past to the future, and no being that is situated in time can grasp all the extent of its life together. Such a being has not yet reached tomorrow. It has already lost yesterday, and even in your life today you live only in one fleeting and transitory moment at a time. Thus that which is subject to the conditions of existence in time, even though it has never begun to be and never ceases to be, as Aristotle held that the universe is without beginning or end, yet is not on that account a thing that can be rightly deemed to be eternal. For though its life is endless, it does not grasp and embrace the whole extent of its life together. It does not yet possess the future, and it has ceased to possess the past. That which grasps and possesses together, in a single whole, all the contents of endless life, that from which nothing of the future is absent, and nothing of the past is fled away, that is rightly called eternal. Such a being must hold itself in its own grasp, must be ever present to itself, and must possess the endless course of fleeting time as a thing present to it. There are some who, when they are told that Plato held that this universe has had no beginning in time, and will never have an end, suppose that it follows from this that the created universe is co-eternal with its creator. But they are mistaken. It is one thing to traverse the course of an endless life, and this is the mode of existence that Plato ascribed to the universe. It is another thing to hold the whole extent of endless life grasped together in one present. And to do this is clearly a peculiar property of the mind of God. It must not be supposed that God's priority to things created is a matter of length of time. He is prior to them rather in virtue of the peculiar quality of his indivisible nature. The unending movement of things temporal is an imitation of the unchanging presence of the life that moves not. The temporal world, since it cannot adequately reproduce the model, falls away from immobility into movement, and declines from an indivisible present to an endless extent of time future and time past. It is unable to hold all the contents of its life in its possession together, but by never coming to an end, it seems to make some attempt at rivaling that which it cannot fully realise in its own being. It binds itself to such a present as the fleeting moment supplies, and that present, since it is not a sort of copy of the abiding present, bestows on all beings which possess it an appearance of existence. But since that momentary present could not abide, it hurried forward along the endless path of time, and so it came to pass that it made continuous by its movement a life, the whole contents of which it had not power to grasp together by abiding. If then we seek to call things by their right names, we shall use the words of Plato and say that God is eternal, but the universe is everlasting. Now, inasmuch as the way in which the judgment apprehends its objects must always be determined by its own nature, and God lives ever in an eternal present, his knowledge transcends all movement of time, and abides in the indivisibility of his present. He grasps the past and the future in all their infinite extent, and with his indivisible cognition he contemplates all events as if they were even now taking place. End quote. The fourth rotation of the universe is now and ever in eternity, and this is aeon. We have already found this thought in Averroes. I said in an earlier chapter that the aspect of the world which is manifest to the physicist is merely one aspect. As presented to sense, the world is a ceaseless process of change, in which matter assumes one form after another, searching, as it were, for a finality which is unreachable in time. But Averroes says that the realization of all strivings and their fourth rotation, quote, is already attained, unquote. This actualization, invisible to sense and beyond time, is achieved now and ever being the same. The fruition of all man's striving is likewise already there. This full fruition of the universe and of all that it contains was called the fullness of all things. There is a form of consciousness that opens on this fullness, a light of the mind which Averroes says man is capable of receiving, as does Ecclesiastes. In the New Testament and elsewhere, the fullness of all things was called the pleura, that which fills up, full measure. This is constantly referred to by Paul. He exhorts his brethren to be strong to apprehend what is the breadth and length and depth and height, so that they may be filled with the fullness of God. In the Hermetic literature, the good is defined as the pleroma of God. By contrast, evil is littleness, clinging to one thing. Is not this time? Paul also speaks of the pleroma of God as that wherein he fulfills all things in all. And from Ephesians, the fullness of him that filleth all in all, chapter 1, verse 23. We have the idea of insufficiency, hysterema, often mentioned in contrast to the fullness, pleroma, of things in Gnostic literature. The material world in time is regarded as a world of defect, a world of frustration, as Paul termed it, where nothing can ever be right. The pleroma is apart from the material world, attainable only internally. Our own insufficiency is that we live in a fraction of ourselves, in a narrow eye, in a narrow vision, in time, in a belief that the material universe of the moment is all. The perfecting of oneself, the attainment of unity, is connected with grasping the idea of pleroma, with a full filling which must mean, to begin with, an overcoming of our narrow temporal vision, so that now we can understand better why the Hermeticist advises the exercise of thinking of the life as living at all points, as a movement towards eternal life. But time, life, is only one track through the fullness of things. Psychologically, our position is determined by our internal states. A state is a place, psychologically. When Bowen was asked where the soul went to at death, he replied that it had no need to go anywhere. Heaven and hell are in us, in this inner space. That is the true site of our mental and emotional existence. Is not this inner space just that wherewith we are in relation to aeon? Are not all those exercises of faith, of transcending time, of getting beyond our natural reason, designed to admit new meaning, and so more of the world of infinite possibilities? Let us remember how we are in the moment, how our momentary will always goes into what is partial. As I said, we cling to one thing, and this is one meaning of time. We think of ourselves as separate, unconnected, and self-existent. We hold to one set of ideas. We see in one way. We live in minute particulars, details. To embrace more reality, to grow into that which is already there, necessitates the giving up of this form of the momentary will, to resign something belonging to every moment of existence. Speaking of the resignation of the momentary will, Bohm observed that man, in his own will, his self-will, can only possess a minute particular. Quote, but in the resignation he gets into the total, into the universal, into all, for all is. End quote. This indefinable process here, called resignation, is always mentioned in the literature referring to the transmutation of man. A tremendous devaluation of the self-will of the ordinary I is demanded. The notion of higher space gives this. This resignation is not an end in itself. Above all, it is not a moral end. It is a means towards an end through which a man, quote, comes into the ground wherein all lies in eternity, and from being poor he becomes rich. End quote. All things are in eternity, apart from visible creation, and he that does not see that time and space are fixed for us by the nature of our organs, cannot move from the situation in which he is. We know that there are an infinite number of directions across a field, but have no idea of there being an infinite number of directions in time. In the world beyond sense, in higher space, we must put all possible directions as psychological directions, just as in the space that we know we can imagine all directions of bodily movements. If the actualization of all possibilities, or the fruition of all strivings, are conceded to this higher space, then not only are all possible forms of our own histories, but all possible forms of the histories of the world realized. What we know as history is not only living in time, as was said before, but is only one track in aeon, a line through all possibilities, which may be growing or degenerating at every point. From this point of view, all manner of forms of the world are already realized and are always being realized, and we know only one of these, just as we know only one track or one form of our own lives. The track which we are following is one of the realizations of our lives, surrounded on all sides by other realizations. To follow another track would mean that we realized, as ordinary beings, another set of possibilities which are always realized, only we are not conscious of them. In this respect we put the idea of another world too far away. We think either of this known world or a next world, a world hereafter. We should think first rather of another direction close to us, that always starts from now, of which we continually catch glimpses, for often we stand on the edge of new meaning. There is no other real starting point but now, but we start always from imagination. Eternity enters into now, and of now we will speak later. And it is with eternity that we must connect all other real possibilities. But living in imagination, we regret yesterday and look forward expectantly to tomorrow. So we run in time, seeking completion. We make no attempt to create any horizon above time. We have no idea of an already existing all. To struggle out of time, out of the flow of becoming, some point beyond it must become so real to us that we begin to seek other orders and possibilities of existence. None of the ordinary knowledge that we train ourselves in will assist us in this. That all possibilities exist, only we follow one line through them, is put in the following way by Ouspensky. Quote, "Time does not exist. There exists no perpetual and eternal appearance and disappearance of phenomena, no ceaselessly flowing fountain of ever-appearing and ever-vanishing events. Everything exists always. There is only one eternal present, the eternal now, which the weak and limited human mind can never grasp and conceive. But the idea of the eternal now is not at all the idea of a cold and merciless predetermination of everything, of an exact and infallible pre-existence. It would be quite wrong to say that if everything already exists, if the remote future exists, it means that there is no life, no movement, no growth, no evolution. People say and think this because they do not understand the infinite and want to measure the immeasurable depths of eternity with their weak and limited finite minds. Of course they are bound to arrive at the most hopeless of all possible solutions of the problem." End quote. The real world is a world of infinite possibilities. Quote, "Our mind follows the development of possibilities always in one direction only. But in fact every moment contains a very large number of possibilities, and all of them are actualized, only we do not see it and we do not know it. We always see only one of the actualizations, and in this lie the poverty and limitation of the human mind. But if we try to imagine the actualization of all the possibilities of the present moment, then of the next moment, and so on, we shall feel the world growing infinitely, incessantly, multiplying itself, and becoming immeasurably rich and utterly unlike the flat and limited world we have hitherto pictured to ourselves. Having imagined this infinite variety, we shall feel a taste of infinity for a moment, and shall understand how inadequate and impossible it is to approach the problem of time with earthly measure. We shall understand what an infinite richness of time going in all directions is necessary, for the actualization of all the possibilities that arise each moment. We shall feel that the world is so boundlessly large that a thought of the existence of any limits in it, a thought of there being anything whatever which is not contained within it, will appear to us ridiculous." End quote. A New Model of the Universe. With eternity, Ouspensky connects a fifth dimension, calling it a second dimension of time. Ultimately, he sees the universe as six-dimensional, as having 3 dimensions of time and 3 dimensions of space. The line of fulfillment of one set of possibilities is a line in time. Now, a surface is infinity for a line, because a surface can contain an infinite number of lines. But a surface is 2-dimensional, so that, thinking in this way, eternity in comparison with time is as a surface to a line. Quote, "Everything we know, everything we recognize as existing lies in the line of the 4th dimension. The line of the 4th dimension is the historical time of our section of existence. This is the only time we know, the only time we feel, the only time we recognize. But though we are not aware of it, sensations of the existence of other times, both parallel and perpendicular, continually enter into our consciousness. These parallel times are completely analogous to our time and consist of before, now, after, whereas the perpendicular times consist only of now and are, as it were, cross-threads, the woof in a fabric, in their relation to the parallel lines of time which in this case represent the warp." End quote from New Model of the Universe. In order to understand how from every moment of time possibilities branch off in every direction, it is necessary to add a 6th dimension, that is, a 3rd dimension of time. Time then becomes a 3-dimensional space above our known space. Ouspensky explains the hieroglyph of the 2 superimposed triangles in reverse, called the Seal of Solomon, as a representation of the 6-dimensional universe, one triangle representing the 3 known dimensions of space, and the other the 3 invisible dimensions of time. Every object we perceive in space extends into the 3 dimensions of time, apart from its visible extension in space. In some cases we see the time bodies of things, e.g. electrons, as solid matter. The complete figure of everything is 6-dimensional. Quote, "We live and think and exist on one of the lines of time, but the 2nd and 3rd dimensions of time, that is, the surface on which this line lies, and the solid in which this surface is included, enter every moment into our life and into our consciousness and influence our time. In thinking of the time solid formed by the lines of all the possibilities included in each moment, we must remember that beyond these there can be nothing. This is the point which we can understand as the limitedness of the infinite universe." End quote. From this point of view, full space-time is a higher space of 6 dimensions, or the space of the actualization of all possibilities. The 6-pointed star, or Seal of Solomon, is the representation of this space-time or period of dimensions, the 3 space dimensions and the 3 time dimensions in unity, where everything is everywhere and always.